Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh is brought to you by
Harry Freebed, Collectible Insurance Services, West Michigan Eye Care Associates, Eric Hall Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Calder Financial, Grand Management Group, Encore Business Group, and Rydan Investments.
Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh.
Stay informed and stay vigilant.
Happy you could join us on National Look Up at the Sky Day, and it's also apparently National Ex-Spouse Day. I think I'll go no comment on that one. But glad you can join us here. We got Dan back in studio as the regular producer. My mom's in here as well. And Rex is roaming around somewhere. I don't know if he's going to make an appearance. He's had missions. We're going to see what happens here with Rex. But we're trying to find him. Maybe he'll patch into the show here soon. But we've got a good lineup here for you today. We've got Zach Surdenik. He does a bunch of things. It always cracks me up with these play-by-play folks that they do a bunch of different things in the broadcasting world. So I want to talk to Zach about that. Zach, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, definitely. You've been a busy guy. I appreciate you making time for us here.
Oh, yeah.
You're in the middle of a transition. You were pulling double duty, right? You were working as the Spartans basketball host, and then also handling. Now you're back working with Lakeland.
Yeah, it was an interesting couple of weeks. It would have been a little more interesting had Michigan State won one more game, and had they made it to San Antonio, that would have made my transition really tight. But at the moment, it's been good. It was a wild few weeks there, but settling in down here in Lakeland now.
Yeah, we booked you after the NCAA tournament was finished with wishful thinking that Michigan State would make it all the way here. I had picked them actually one of my brackets. I thought they had a good shot, but they came up a little short. Hey, how was that? I want to cover them first here because they had a really good season, and the end of the tournament ended up being a little chalkier than I had hoped here.
Yeah, it was a really interesting run. It was a season that I don't think anybody, even inside the program, necessarily expected to be the way that it was, and to be how good that team was, running through the Big Ten 17-3, winning the conference by 3 games, and then going into the tournament, they did what they did all year. They had some really tough games, and they were able to find their way through it. And then that Auburn game, the one thing you can't do against a team like Auburn is let them bury you with the avalanche, and that's what happened early. That 17-0 run really killed MSU's shot in that game. They were able to get it back to 5 a couple of times, but just nothing that they could really do to continue to push all the way back in, because you know a game like that is going to be a game of runs. And when you go down so much early, instead of your run putting you ahead by 4 or 5, your run puts you back within 5, and that's just not going to cut it in that type of game. So it was disappointing for them and for the program coming up short there in that Elite 8 game, but still a really, really strong season, and I hope that people at home and the fans were able to really get some enjoyment out of this group. I know I did. It was really, really fun group to be around on the court, off the court. You hear so much about their chemistry and how connected they were, but you don't really see it as much right away. It takes time to really think about, and I think it'll hopefully be a little more, or continue to be appreciated by people as the years go on, because this group was definitely special and definitely different than a lot of groups with the way that college basketball is going right now.
Yeah, unfortunately, they had a habit of having slow starts to their games, and that did come back to bite them in that Auburn game. But yeah, you can't blame them for this season. It was a great season. One of my favorite predictions thus far on the show is I predicted that we were going to have a Jackson Kohler game, and we finally did by the end, because I'm a big Kohler guy, and he's an unsung guy for that team. He's great on the backside screens, especially when they put him in there with Cooper, and he provides a lot of different things without touching the ball. But I think they almost forget sometimes, like, oh, wait a minute, he devalues his own offense, but he could shoot from 3, and he's got some moves down there in the post. So I was happy to see him shine once the tournament rolled on.
Yeah, Jackson Kohler is going to be a really big piece next year, I think, for this Michigan State team. He's so talented, and people see what he did as a sophomore, and then they talk about this big leap. But Jackson Kohler was on track to be one of the better players on this team last season, coming into his sophomore year, and then he got hurt. He had a great summer and then just wasn't able to stay healthy, and that injury set him back. But he's a really, really hard worker and has a lot of talent down in the post as well as outside. I remember talking with one of the Michigan State assistants earlier this year when Jackson Kohler was at the gym early for a shoot-around, or after a shoot-around before the game, went there with a group early, was shooting threes, and he looked at me and said, when he knocks one down, the floodgates are going to open, and he's going to hit a ton of them. And that's kind of what we saw. He hit a couple against Illinois and got himself going. And once that first one went down, look out, because when Jackson Kohler gets himself going and gets that confidence in that shot, he's really, really tough to guard because you have to respect the post game so much as well.
Yeah, because, I mean, he's a key with stretching the floor, especially with those other big guys running around. I feel like they looked at him and went, okay, this guy that I don't know if it's like a mohawk that he's got, not really sure what he's got going up top, but he really could shoot the three, and I feel like people, even though they were seeing that and the percentages were good, like you said, that you lose your defensive integrity and rotation if you have to go all the way out to him, and I think some people just didn't necessarily respect it, but once he had the confidence in it, he was hitting it well, so I could see him being a big riser to next year. This is going to be a tough transition here because they're going to lose some important pieces, but I know they're working the transfer portal as much as they do, because that's kind of a trademark of Izzo, is he doesn't like to dabble in the transfer portal, the NIL world, as much as others do.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see where this group goes. I really like the addition they've already made in Caleb Glenn from Florida Atlantic. I think he can fill a really good role with his size and athleticism, and he's a more of an Izzo-type transfer because he's not a one-year grad guy. He's got 2 years of eligibility, and so look for those different pieces. I think there's probably at least one, maybe a couple moves coming at some point in the offseason. Just looking at the scholarships they have open and the spots that they need to fill, you've got to think there's a couple more moves coming. We'll see what Coach Izzo and the program has up their sleeve coming into it, but I think it's going to be really interesting. I like some of the pieces that they'll bring back. You've got Jeremy Fears with a full offseason. You saw the growth that he had throughout the year. Jackson Kohler, we already mentioned. Cohen Carr continuing to grow, continuing to progress into a guy that can really be a matchup nightmare for teams, because even at the Power 5 level, teams don't really have the athleticism to match up with Cohen Carr if he continues to progress like he has to this point. And so you add those pieces alongside a couple of those other guys. I like the freshmen coming in Jordan Scott and Cam Ward. I'm really, really curious to see what this group looks like when we get into the fall. And I think that's something in general with college basketball right now. There's so much movement and everything going on that we want to look at things in a vacuum in the moment and be a prisoner of the moment. But at the same time, at the end of the day, you really have to just kind of see how the offseason plays out and look at these teams when they get on the court in October, because nobody thought that this Michigan State team would be where they are, because you don't know who's going to emerge. Jace Richardson was really, really spectacular this season, and people didn't expect that coming into the year. People weren't sure if Jace Richardson was going to crack the rotation too much with this group, and instead he ended up being the best player on the squad.
Yeah, I'm surprised by that. I mean, I guess I'm probably doing a legacy thing there, because I watched his dad a lot in college and in the pros, and I really thought he was going to burst onto the scene. I know freshmen don't always see the court as much, especially in Izzo's world, but yeah, he clearly had the maturity. He had worked his way onto the floor, so yeah, that was fun to watch him mature and develop, and then see the comparisons with Izzo with his dad and the son. So that was all pretty cool. But yeah, they'll be able to reload. And I agree with you. It's interesting how this has changed. I mean, even just in the time that you've been doing this, that it's the whole cycle has changed. You talk about stuff in a vacuum and the hyper focus of all the news stuff going on, but there's also the fact that like, it's weird that the coaches were actively in the NCAA tournament, but also having to recruit at the same time and try to work the portal and work different things while they're actively in the tournament. I mean, coaching's hard enough, and now they've got more things on their docket here.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting the way that all of that goes, and coaches have talked about that in his press conference before the team went to Atlanta, just about the transfer portal opening. You heard other coaches talk about it too during the tournament. It's something that I don't think is going to continue for too much longer with how much outrage there is, but it's a really weird spot. And it's the same thing in the college football side when you have Penn State's backup quarterback, who was a integral part of their squad in a lot of their jumbo packages toward the goal line, entering the portal before they start their playoff games. They've still got a chance to compete for a national championship, and he's in the transfer portal because that's what he's got to do. No offense to him, it's the system. And that's something that is going to be really interesting to see the way that it goes from here, because I think everybody knows that the way that the system is set up right now is not necessarily sustainable.
Oh yeah, and we talked about him on the show because we had somebody covering the college football playoff for us, covering Penn State for us, and like you said, it is the system. They've got to move, kind of like the Holloman thing with Michigan State. I know people were not happy with him moving, but I do kind of get it from an NIL perspective. They're incentivizing different things, and you can't get mad when the incentives mean different things, when they're incentivizing coaches to go recruit elsewhere, or incentivizing people to leave their team before the season's over, or transfer away from their team even though they look kind of like a career Spartan. It's just the way the incentives are in place now.
Yeah, it's just kind of the way things go, and you have to take it for what it's worth and realize that sometimes everybody has to kind of do what they feel like is best for them, and that's the way it plays out, and just move on and appreciate where things are at.
Oh yeah, and Izzo does a great job of handling all of this stuff. I mean, the fact that he still adjusts, especially at his age, and can roll with this stuff continues to be amazing to me, because it seems like people are trying to start the narrative of like, oh, maybe this is kind of passing him by. It's like, well, he made the Elite Eight and he's still working the system the way that he wants to work it. So I guess he's still young enough to continue to do this. I don't know for how long, because I do worry about his health sometimes, but he looks great out there.
It's really interesting, that topic, though, about it passing Izzo by. I saw him really, really fiery in a lot of press conferences this year about that. He mentioned, even at Media Day at the start of the year, that there were coaches trying to use his age against him in recruiting and use that as something to go against him. And he just responded, go ahead. He said, I'm not going anywhere, and I'm going to do what I need to do to win basketball games while still maintaining his program. And a lot of people doubted the ability to do that. And yet at the same time, this year you saw only the sixth time in his career that his team won 30 games. They went to the Elite Eight. They won a Big Ten championship. They get to raise banners. They get championship rings, all the same. Whether you do it, enter it with a bunch of transfer portal guys, or you do it the way that Izzo did it, the ring's still going to fit. And so that's something that he really, I'm sure, is going to look back on this season and really be proud of this group. You saw a lot of emotions from a lot of guys at the end of that season, because this group really was special, and it's something that's a rarity, and we're going to see how many more of them you can have. But at the moment, I don't think that Izzo's going anywhere.
Well, and he's got a lot of momentum going into next year, even with the player turnover. So it should be an interesting season to watch here. But I want to turn our attention to the Tigers after the break. So we'll come back with Zach and talk some minor league and major league Tigers. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Zach Surdenik. He gave us some great stuff on Michigan State. I want to talk about your gig with Lakeland, though, because we've been kind of doing our rounds of the minor league play-by-play guys. We had Dan Hasty on the show a couple weeks ago. We're friends with Greg Gagne, and so it's fun to talk to you guys, because you guys are always doing too many things. I don't know why I don't know why the play-by-play guys have to do everything. Why do you guys have to do so many jobs? The one job is enough, but they make you do 18 different jobs.
Hey, it's all about trying to make sure that everything goes well. It's different every place you're at, too, in terms of what is required and what is needed to be done. And minor league baseball is a world of its own compared to everything else that I've worked in, for sure.
Well, that makes me wonder, Ryan. Zach, you alluded to it in the first segment, but if the Spartans had made a longer run. What was that brought about as far as scheduling conflicts for you, and what would the contingency plan been?
Yeah, so it was interesting. I had the plan ready.
Okay.
Basically, so Lakeland only broadcasts the home games. So I only do the home games for Lakeland. So I don't travel. So the opening day was Friday, the 4th of April. And the team was on the road in Tampa to play the Yankees A-ball team, the Tampa Tarpons. So, but I wouldn't have done those games. So I would have been fine to be in San Antonio. The home opener for Lakeland, the first game that I did was this past Tuesday, the 8th of April. Well, the national title game was last Monday,
Right.
the 7th. And so had Michigan State made the title game, I would have known by Saturday night, and I would have had a Tuesday morning flight from San Antonio to Orlando, and I would have gotten into Orlando in the middle of the day on Tuesday, and I would have gotten down to Lakeland probably by like 3 o'clock and would have called opening night.
So Ryan,
Would have
sounds
been
like,
a very fun turnaround. But,
yeah, it sounds like the contingency
yeah.
plan was you were just going to do everything that you were booked to do.
Yeah, just teleport to both places.
Yeah, it was going to be a very, very long day, but it would have been fun. I think that it was good though for me personally. It worked out for my schedule well to get down here when I did. It helped me to get settled in Lakeland a little bit. I did come down here for a couple of days between the Michigan State-Michigan game and the Big Ten tournament. There was a 5-day break. And so I flew down to Lakeland and spent a couple of days during spring training down here so that I could kind of get acclimated with the facilities a little bit and like get in the booth and see all of that stuff, as well as get a tour of like the clubhouse and everything. So I kind of knew where I was going to be at, because if Michigan State made it that far, I wouldn't be able to get down here. And so I wanted to make sure that I was familiar with it enough. And they were helpful enough to get me everything I needed. The Tigers organization's been great to me both this year and then last year. I worked with the Tigers in Detroit in communications and broadcasting, doing some PR stuff as their seasonal assistant last year. And so the Tigers organization's been great, and they helped me out, making sure I had everything I needed so that if they did go on that run, that I was able to be prepped and have everything ready to where if I needed to do that, I would still be able to come in and deliver a quality broadcast information-wise.
The Tigers have done a great job. Obviously, there's a lot of talk always about what's going on the field and the managerial improvement, the coaching improvement, all of those kinds of things, and rightfully so. But like I said, we've talked to many of the broadcasters, and they have quite the broadcasting lineup with all you guys from top to bottom, from the major league roster and then down to where you're at in the minor leagues. It's impressive to watch, because we watch it, since we talk to Greg regularly, we see him bounce back and forth and cover for Dan, and then obviously Dan's been a stalwart for a long time. Jason Benetti is great. So they clearly know how to hire talent, including yourself, and it's fun to watch that part, because I actually like the broadcasting part. I like listening to that. I know who I'm listening to, which is something that we try to emphasize on the show, because the people don't always know who they're listening to, and they should, because they're the one that they're hearing from all game. Yes, they're watching the players play, but they're hearing your voice for the entire game.
It's in-house talent.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's been really cool to interact with Tigers fans over the last week or so since I started on air in Lakeland, and I'm excited to do that going forward. I'm from Michigan. I grew up in Lansing, and so I grew up around the Tigers on the baseball side, and so being able to interact with the fan base has been really cool, and I'm excited to continue to do that. There's a lot of talent coming up, and it's been really cool to get to learn from those guys too. I met Dan Dickerson when I was a freshman at Michigan State. His wife is one of the sports journalism professors at Michigan State, and she does a great job there, and Dan comes around and will help out a little bit with some of the students. And so I met Dan a while ago, and he's been a big help to me. And then I worked closely with Greg Gania last year when I was in Detroit, when he would come up to cover for Dan, as you mentioned. And so just getting to learn from those guys, and then learning from Jason last year as well, was a really big help for me just coming out of school and getting into this industry. And now it's been really, really good to be able to get involved and get going with this group and have some fun with it.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about working with some of those guys in Detroit, because that had to be interesting to watch all that happen and now be part of the system here and one of the roster of excellent, talented broadcasters here. So it sounds like you got a chance to work with pretty much everybody between Greg, Jason, and Dan in that previous role you were in.
Yeah, so I did a lot of different things on the communications and broadcasting side, but specifically working with the broadcasters, I did a lot of help on the radio side, and also I should mention Carlos Guillen and Barbaro Garbe, too, on the Spanish radio side for the Tigers. Were really, really good. I worked closely with them, helped kind of produce that show as it was launching. It's now in every home game this year they're doing it. It's gotten more and more every year, and it's been great. Carlos is also the Spanish media relations coordinator, so he does all the translation and stuff. Really, really good job, and working with him too was great. And they just getting to see the different ways that everybody does things. I've always been somebody that wants to learn from people as much as I can. I remember the first internship I got in the Northwoods League, a collegiate summer league. I was working in Kalamazoo and Battle Creek with the Bombers and the Growlers. And so I was just around. I was supposed to do PA, but it was during the COVID summer, so things got moved around. I ended up doing a lot of different jobs there. And I ended up getting the broadcast at the end of the summer. But I remember the two broadcasters that were there. I was fresh out of high school, graduated high school a couple months before, and I was just like, hey, do you mind if I just kind of watch you prep? And I'm sure I was bothering them with way too many questions, but I just wanted to soak in and see how everybody did what they do. And so getting to be around those guys and be a part of the booth, and I helped Dan a ton with stats last year. I would look up a lot of things and find different things. He always joked about me being his research department there alongside the actual research department for the Tigers, which does a great job and a better job than I did. But it was really cool to just kind of see the way everybody went about things. And they're so different. Like the podcast, if you guys haven't listened to Have a Seat, Dan Dickerson and Jay Spinetti's podcast, it's great. And my favorite part about working on that podcast was seeing how different they are. Dan has everything written out. He's got all his questions. He's got a bunch of notes and everything. And Jason comes in with his ideas, but he doesn't have a bunch of notes. He's just off the top of the head. He's like, why is that? What makes you so good at that? What, all of those questions that, and the way that only Jason can do that in those interviews versus Dan, and them working together was just so cool to see. And it just being able to take things from different people and build those relationships, not in a network way. I think people sometimes get in a way where they try to work with people and they're like, oh, I can get this out of it, I can get this out of it. Just building friendships with people and being able to talk about work and talk about other things, and just building those relationships is so huge. And that was really, really great opportunity for me last year.
Well, like you said, you can learn things from each individual that you run across. We see that a lot talking to a lot of broadcasters on the show, because like you said, everybody has their style. Then you have to have your own authenticity to it, because authenticity is important in broadcasting. But then you take pieces and see how they prepare, see how they learn. And yeah, the different styles are apparent when they're on air. Like when Benetti does a game, when Benetti and Dirks do a game, it's very different than when Dickerson and Petrie do a game. But I like both games. That I like the way that those are called, but it's clear that they have different methods, different preparation. But yeah, as a young up and coming broadcaster, it's nice to be able to involve all of those different items in your repertoire and then work from there.
Yeah, and you can learn. I've learned this going through, and I've kind of always felt this in life, but in general, in broadcasting, you can learn from anybody. Like, I learned a ton from Dan Dickerson and Jason Benetti and people at the top of the game in this. And I've learned a ton from working with students at Michigan State when I was in leadership roles in, like, our student radio and our student TV, listening to younger students that are newer at this coming in and have a lot less experience. I learned things from them, too, because everybody has their own way of going about it, like you said, and you can see so much through their lens. And I had this conversation with one of them a little bit ago, actually, when I was talking with them about the authenticity is so huge, but you take other things and you listen back to your stuff and you listen to other stuff, and yeah, I really liked how they did this. I didn't like how they did this. I didn't like how I did this. And then that's how you continue to grow, especially in a sport like baseball. There's so many games. Even with Lakeland, where I'm only doing the home broadcast, there's still 66 games in the regular season.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got time throughout the entire summer to continue to grow. If anybody is out there listening at home that listens to the game on Tuesday night, the first game of the year, and if you stick with us and listen to the game and watch the game at the end of the year, I'm sure you'll see a completely different broadcast in terms of growth in things, but also I hope you'll still see the same authenticity from me, that I'm out here enjoying doing the game and so blessed to be able to have the opportunities that I've had to be able to bring all of these sports and all of these moments to everybody at home and be able to share it with everybody, because it's cool. I mean, our jobs are really cool. We get paid to talk about sports, and that's a really, really cool thing that we get to do, and I don't take it for granted. And I just hope that if anybody comes through and listens to any of the Lakeland broadcasts, whether it's a 20-second clip on social media or whether it's a whole broadcast or whatever it is, I hope that people are able to enjoy these moments that we get to have and realize that these are really fun things we get to do.
Well, that's a great mindset for it, and it'll be interesting to watch your development over the course of the year. We'll definitely tune into that. Tell the people where they can find you in between to social media and such.
Yeah, so I'm probably the most active on Twitter or X at Zach Surdenik, just my name, and I know you guys posted something earlier on your guys' social media about tonight and tagged me in that, and so you can find me there. I'm also really not too much on the other social media platforms. I probably should be a little more on some of them, and I'll continue to grow with that a little bit as well. Throughout the year, I want to make some content with it. And then through our Michigan State social media as well, I'll be active on my personal, but also on the Spartan_radio. A lot of content pregame and stuff will come out then once we get back into basketball season. And our Lakeland Flying Tigers social media is posting a lot of stuff as well on Instagram and Twitter.
There's too many social media platforms out there. I'm with you. I can't keep track of all of them either, so that's why I wanted you to direct them to where you are. Yep. But be sure to follow Zach. Well, great stuff, Zach. We appreciate you coming on, and we'll look forward to having you back on as the season progresses here.
Yes, sounds great. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
All right, take care.
You too.
All right, thanks to Zach Surdenik. He did a great job talking about both state and his broadcasting career in Lakeland and everything. We're going to turn our attention to the Pistons because we got a lot going on with the Pistons, and Rex has joined me in studio, so I'm happy about that. We're going to talk some Pistons with Sean Murphy and of the From Half Court podcast, and we'll get his takes on the first round matchup here. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Happy to come on here with Sean Murphy. We've been talking to Sean all season. He's had great coverage. We talked to him before the season began, and I bet, Sean, we weren't talking about playoffs when the season began for your first appearance, so it's fun to commemorate it here and talk about how they're not in the play-in, they're in the playoffs. So welcome to the show, Sean.
Ryan, thank you so much for having me. It's great talking to you again. I remember before the season, talking about realistic expectations and goals for this team, and we talked about how a 30-win season would be a massive victory. Little did we know that we would see a 30-win jump, a playoff series against the New York Knicks, and they're going to have one of the marquee first-round matchups in the first round, the NBA. So exciting times to be a Pistons fan, an NBA fan, and yeah, man, appreciate you having me on.
Well, yeah, and if you would have said at the beginning of the season when we were doing that preview, hey, the Ivy thing works out for a little while, then he gets hurt and basically lost for the season, but that's when they start to take off and they end up tripling their win total. That would have been very hard to visualize, but the effective reality of that has been fun to watch, and I still think Ivy can help this team. It's nothing against him. It's just the idea that he was developing and that three-point shot was showing that we're talking about. Clearly Vincent was helping him with his shot, and they unfortunately lost him, but they hit their groove after that, and it's amazing to think that one of the core guys is out, but they're still doing this.
Yeah, it just speaks to the culture that this team built. The next man up mentality a lot of times can be, something that sounds like a real cliche, but it's something that this Pistons group really, embodied throughout the season, especially, when they had Jaden Ivey go down. And the fact that they were able to not only weather that storm, like you said, but, if anything, their win percentage only improved as the season went on, and as did, their defensive rating, their offensive rating, just about every area. And the fact that management was able to go get a Dennis Schroeder and not give up anything, if anything, get picks in return, and how effective he's been, just a seamless transition to come in and be a secondary ball handler. It's even freed up guys like Marcus Sasser to play more of a natural position for them as well. So just a lot of different things that have really just stemmed, from good decisions from the front office and, solid execution by the coaching staff and, the players just buying into the culture that they're building. And now, you just see the Pistons, they're one of the most tight-knit, young cores that this league has, and truly they're playing with house money, which if you're the New York Knicks, who were built to beat the Boston Celtics, you're 0-10 against the top 3 teams in the league this season. You got to 50 wins, which is only 1 win improvement over last season, and your identity, which has been defense, is just quite frankly not what this team is known for. They're 13th in defensive rating this year, which for Tom Thibodeau is just not the standard. They do not feel very easy about facing a Pistons team that does have all those things going for them. So it's going to be a fascinating first round matchup, I think puts it lightly.
Sean, this is Rex. It sounds like you are ecstatic about the Knicks draw. Last week, and up to the time where the bracket was being formed, there was a debate whether the Pacers or the Knicks would be a better matchup for the Pistons. It sounds like that you heavily favor the Knicks matchup.
Yep, that would be correct. And it's not that the Pistons wouldn't be competitive in either series. I think both would be good for them. And ultimately, this is about evaluation and, seeing where this team stands when they do go up against those premier teams. But at the same time, I think when you are talking about how can the Pistons make the deepest run, the Pistons have won 3 out of 4 against the Knicks this season. The Pistons' strength is what ultimately exploits the Knicks' weaknesses, which is defending in the interior and playing with physicality is exactly what the Pistons like to do. So if Jalen Duren can exploit that mismatch in the paint and make Karl Anthony Towns really uncomfortable, then on the other end with a Jalen Brunson who's coming off of a pretty severe ankle sprain, he's back, but we don't even know truly how 100% he is. So, and again, this Knicks team has not been playing the best basketball over the last month or so. So, to me, like when you look at what's the most favorable matchup, and also what's the matchup where the Pistons can keep their composure the easiest, because the other thing with the Pacers is they match up really well with the Pistons. They both can run. The Pacers are really energetic offensively, and then you throw in the fact that they have this real rivalry. And we've seen with this Pistons team is one constant is they're going to play hard, but they're going to get into some mix-ups as well. So if you're talking about what's the series that not only can they compete at a high level, but also that they're probably not going to lose multiple players due to suspension if something happens, it's probably the Knicks series. So the Pacers series would probably have been the highest intrigue for the rivalry reason, but how can you not have high intrigue when you're going up against the New York Knicks? So no matter what draw it was, the Pistons, again, they're playing with house money, and ultimately they just need to get a win, because the last time they won a playoff game, George W. Bush was still in office.
That puts things in perspective. That was a long time ago. Yeah, absolutely. And I see what you're saying, that there's plus and minuses for both the Pacers and the Knicks, but it seems like, and you discussed this just a moment ago, it sounds like not only do they match up better from your perspective, the Pistons versus the Knicks, but they're also catching the Knicks at the right time with this downswing that they're experiencing.
Yep, I think so too. Yep, that's exactly it. And the Pacers, meanwhile, they've only been playing their best basketball as the season has gone on. Tyrese Halliburton really struggled in October and November, but he's really starting to look like the guy that was an all-star, all-NBA caliber player last season. So, it's a lot of things in this, in the NBA and just in sports in general are just about timing and just about the matchup that you get. And in my opinion, if you're talking about the Pistons potentially making a Cinderella run or, playing deep into May, their best chance, in my opinion, it starts with playing the Knicks.
Yeah, I agree on that, Sean. I wanted to see the Pacers series just basically because of the spectacle that it would have been, but you're totally right about the matchup and the fact that with the Knicks, it's funny. I didn't think of how calm. I knew they would be much less likely to get into a skirmish for sure. But the Knicks are like relatively fairly calm too. When you look at their roster, Hart can kind of mix it up a little bit, but compared to that Pacers roster, there would have been a lot going on. But on the Knicks side of things, I am a Thibodeau fan. But even though I like his teams and the way they're typically composed, they're also the types of teams that you typically want to play in the playoffs because he burns his guys out during the regular season. And I think that's why we're seeing some of the downturn here late in the season. So I feel like getting them in the playoffs is not when they're the freshest, just because, man, those guys I love the way Josh Hart plays. I love the way a lot of those guys play, but they've got a lot of mileage on those legs, and we saw that with some of the Flip Saunders teams with the Pistons back in the day. You can be great during the regular season, but you can also burn your players out, whereas the Pistons are kind of in the reverse scenario.
And this is perhaps the shortest his rotations will ever be, because this Knicks team is extremely top-heavy. When you look at, the trades that this team made and, the roster that they constructed on paper, it's one of the best 1 through 5 lineups in the league. It was built to beat the Boston Celtics. The funny thing is, they couldn't beat the Boston Celtics or the Cavaliers or the Oklahoma City Thunder or, for that matter, after November, the Detroit Pistons. So, again, the Knicks are still the favorite team just because they have Karl Anthony Towns, they have OG Anunoby, Mikal Bridges, Jalen Brunson. They have a really good team with solid players, but if injuries start to come into play, that team gets way less deep very quickly. And if some of those guys are struggling, he doesn't necessarily have a whole lot of guys that he can really turn to on that bench that he can feel comfortable going, hey, go in and make something happen. So Tibbs is one of the smartest coaches in the league. I have no doubt that the Knicks will at least be better defensively once the playoffs start, and things do change once you do get into more of those matchup intensive, scenarios, like once you can really start to game plan for one team specifically. But at the same time, as I said earlier, the Pistons have been a really good interior team. They're great at scoring in the paint. They're really hard to keep out of the paint. And if this Pistons team can run, they can wear this Knicks team out pretty quickly. So I think it's going to be really telling how this Pistons team comes out in Game 1. Not to say that the series is decided after one game, but generally speaking, when you do see these lower seed upsets, a lot of it stems from a Game 1 upset or, to really catch them on their back feet. So it's going to be interesting to see how they play Saturday, 6 p.m., ESPN in Madison Square Garden. That's about as big as it gets as far as the scenario goes. But I think you have some guys on this Pistons team where they thrive on those bright lights, especially at Cade Cunningham. He's really enjoyed playing in the Garden. So, again, even though the Pacers series would have probably been a real spectacle, it's hard to beat the spectacle of the New York Knicks in the Madison Square Garden.
And you hit the nail on the head, Sean. I mean, the Pistons are a young team, but they're not a team that's going to profile as playing young here in the playoffs. They're going to be ready for the moment, and I think they're going to be the aggressor here in the playoff, in their first playoff series. So it'll be interesting to watch that. But great stuff so far from Sean. We got to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and talk about more of the matchups here. And I want to talk about his take on Dumars possibly being back in the league from an executive standpoint. So come back with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Sean Murphy. He's given us great stuff so far. We want to analyze the Knicks matchup a little bit more. Sean, Rex has a question for you on that. But I was looking at your X account here, and I wanted to talk to you about the Dumars thing, because that's interesting to me. We both grew up in the Dumars era, watching those teams getting composed, and he built a great group. But he's interesting to me as an executive because he seemed to have kind of two different eras there. He had the build to that great team, one of the best team builds really in probably the history of the league, at least during that era. And then he lost some executives in the front office, and it seemed like he maybe didn't have the same core there to advise him and help him out. And then we had the era with Charlie Villanueva and Ben Gordon and some other decisions that didn't seem to be on par with the ones from the early going. So, but I agree with you that it's interesting that it's taken this long for him to get another look here.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Joe Dumars was obviously a polarizing executive as far as up and down throughout his tenure in Detroit. Obviously started great with the team that he assembled, not just the championship, but just the consecutive, playoff success, the 60-plus win seasons, the constant conference finals appearances. I mean, the first, 7-8 years of the Joe Dumars tenure, like, not only was it a standard for that team to make it to the conference finals, like it was considered a disappointment if they didn't make it to that, whereas now it's like, man, what a far cry that is, right? But for Joe Dumars, obviously you nailed a lot of the things that caused his doom in Detroit, and in my opinion, what have kind of kept him out of the front office roles over the last decade is, some of those drafting decisions that he's made. I think even when you win a championship, when you decide to draft a Darko Milicic, even though everyone at the time was still saying was the move to make, when you pass on a Carmelo Anthony, a Dwayne Wade, a Chris Bosh, that's going to reflect on your record, and that's going to follow you for pretty much forever. But on top of that, some of the financial decisions of Ben Gordon, Charlie Villanueva, blowing up the team when he did and going to get Allen Iverson in the Chauncey Billups trade, there were certainly a lot of decisions that were kind of his undoing. Obviously, probably kind of the nail in the coffin was the Brandon Jennings trade where he sent Chris Middleton to Milwaukee, and obviously we saw the career that he had there. So obviously I think the big thing with Joe Dumars is he didn't necessarily adapt to the game at the speed that he needed to in order to continue his success in Detroit. Now, it's been 11 years since he was an executive. He's worked in the league office as the head of basketball operations. Essentially any fines, suspensions, league rulings, or any punishment that's been laid down over the last 3-4 years, that's been Joe Dumars at the helm of. So on top of that, he's worked with the Kings a little bit in an advisory role. At the very least, we can say he learned what not to do while in his time in Sacramento. But I think the big thing is for Joe Dumars is going to be, what did he learn in that time, and did he ultimately gain skills that can kind of undo a lot of his mistakes and flaws that he had in the past? Because this Pelicans team more than likely is going to have to head in some form of reset or rebuild, because it has been a flat-out disaster under the Zion Williamson era. And more than likely, they're going to need him to draft well. And we all know that was not his strength in Detroit. So it's going to be interesting to see how it goes. But having said all that, they're going to get a very stable figure. This is a guy who brought every single championship that the Pistons have had to Detroit, whether he was a player or as an executive. This is one of the greatest figures, not only for NBA players, but just in the NBA period. So it's just good to see him get another chance. I think it's going to be a good thing for New Orleans ultimately, and I hope he truly brings success there, because that's a franchise that's gone through a lot of turmoil over the last decade plus.
Yeah, I'd like to see how he does here in this tenure. I think, because I remember back to that era when John Hammond was there, and I feel like he was a key part of that. If Dumars can put together, he's got so many connections now, and if he can put together a staff that can help supplement him, I feel like that would be an interesting time frame here for him to take over and then manage everybody, especially now that he's managed things at the league level, like you said. But I also wanted, well, this will have to be a future segment, Sean, but I want to do the butterfly effect of that Darko Milicic pick too, because it's interesting to me, that discussion about, like, if they had picked somebody else, you probably don't win the championship that year, but you open up the championship window larger, and I think that would be a fun, maybe like a summer off-season conversation. But we got to get some more of your takes here on the playoffs, since we're gearing up for those. And Rex had an interesting question regarding the Knicks and the team build there.
Yes, Sean. The question is, you talked about how the Knicks were built to do this and the Knicks were built to do that. Last year, it seemed like the Knicks were on the ascendancy, And now you're talking about how everything they were built for, they weren't able to accomplish. I'm wondering what you think the source of that is. I think there's a lot of people that observe the NBA that would think that the source of that is systemic, and it goes back to that blockbuster trade they had in the off season.
Yeah, I think it's a mixture of things. I think some of it is the trades that they did make. Specifically, if you're going to look at any trade, I think the Mikal Bridges trade is something that is not only significantly damaged their long-term flexibility because they gave up a lot of draft capital in that trade. The Nets had all the leverage. The Nets knew that that's exactly the player the Knicks wanted. They wanted to avoid him going across to the Garden as much as humanly possible, and the only way they're going to do it is if they got an absolute bona fide haul, which they 100% got. And I think if you were to put the Knicks on a lie detector test, I think they would have some hesitation about making that move. I think there's just a foregone conclusion that if you reunite the Villanova boys that won a national championship on the NBA level, that was just automatically, going to lead to that deep playoff success. Well, then you parlay that into a Karl Anthony Towns trade, and in theory, you have a really solid, defense on the wing. You have awesome players in OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges, who were known as two of the best wing defenders in the league. At least Mikal Bridges has not been that whatsoever on the defensive end. He's been essentially a shell of himself when it comes to that side of the ball. He can still score, but he's just not the defender that you need him to be. So for a solid part of the season, a team that was top 5, top 3 defensively was in the 20s or below average. Finally, they rounded back and they improved as the season went on, but they're only a 13th ranked defense. So they're one of the best offenses in the league, but a Tom Thibodeau team of all teams being a premier offense that sacrifices on the defensive side just doesn't make a lot of sense. And then you throw in the fact that your best player is a Jalen Brunson, who, listen, I am as much of a Jalen Brunson advocate as you will find. I just don't think Jalen Brunson could be your best player on a championship-winning team.
I think it's just hard to have guards be that.
Towns has had, he's just been exactly who he's been.
I think in general, Sean, if you've seen historically, it's hard to have a smaller guard be the centerpiece of a championship team. Looking at our hometown, the bad boys are able to do it with Isaiah, but that is not usually the case. It's really hard to find someone that can pull that role.
And as awesome as Jalen Brunson is, Isaiah Thomas is a whole different beast. And he had Joe Dumars alongside him. He had a absolute stellar supporting cast. And also that team had a real chemistry and togetherness that quite frankly, I just don't know if this Knicks group has.
It seemed like they had more chemistry last year than this year. I think that these trades really altered that.
Yeah, I think they saw momentum, palpable momentum, and a group of guys that they really thought they could capitalize with, which, listen, I understand and to a certain extent liked the moves at the time. But again, and this is going to be the thing that will face the Pistons regardless of whatever happens this postseason going into the offseason, is when you make those moves, you essentially have one shot, especially for the Pistons. When you have like that limited amount of assets, salary cap space, etc., especially with Cade Cunningham, you might only have one chance or one trade to go and build a contender around him. And whenever you do it, you have to make sure without an absolute doubt that it makes you a contender or keeps you in contention for years to come. That's the problem with the Knicks. They might have just created their own ceiling and given up their own future to do so.
It is interesting to see these teams match up with each other and see kind of the stocks here. The Knicks feel like a bit of a falling stock, and the Pistons are clearly on the rise because they've held tight with, hey, we've got good team chemistry, we've got young guys, we know we're going to get development out of them. That was one of the masterpieces, I think, underrated over the course of the season. We talked right as the trade deadline was happening, Sean, but we talked about how they were in a great position to have all this cap space and be the only team with cap space. But I thought they played it perfectly because they could have made their swing then because they were in a very advantageous position. But they held, and they picked up Schroeder, who's been a great fit, as you mentioned, and they picked up only assets, but they didn't rock the boat too much because they know they're on the upswing. And like you said, when you make the big swing, you can't miss.
Yeah, exactly. And they acknowledged even that they were tempted to look at the league and say, could we make a move or take some form of swing? But they recognized that this group was doing something special, and I think to a certain extent there's something to be said about seeing this season through and seeing what this group has, because as we even talked about, at that time, was whatever level of postseason basketball this Pistons team gets, the ultimate benefit is that's going to be your greatest time for evaluation of your Trajan Langdon, Michael Blackstone, like anyone else in this front office. You're going to be able to watch these guys in the brightest lights against the best teams, get to see them game planned against and how they respond and how they perform in that. And that is the best possible test that you can get to say how ready these guys are, how ready this team is, and what, if anything, they need to do in the offseason.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to watch because, like you said, it's house money right now with the series, and then we'll have a lot more to talk about, including that Milicic trade. I want to have that segment. We'll have a lot to talk about in the offseason, but it'll be fun to watch. We'll just be enjoying it. Tell people where they can find your coverage here during the playoffs, Sean.
I appreciate you, man. Yeah, you can follow myself on X at Sean Halfcourt. You can also find the podcast from Halfcourt on YouTube. Going to be doing a lot more content on there as the playoffs go on. More than likely, we'll do some post-game reactions as well. And anytime you want to do any Darko Milicic or any retro Pistons talk, I am always down for that.
Yeah, we're going to have to fill here in the summertime. We're going to have a lot of baseball coverage, but we're going to be getting other things in the show. So that's one thing I definitely like to do, because the butterfly effect of these moves always interests me here, looking back and looking forward. So we'll do that, and be sure to follow Sean's stuff because he gives us great stuff like we've done here. But appreciate you coming on, Sean, and we'll hopefully talk to you again soon.
Sounds great. Thanks so much again for having me.
No problem. Take care, Sean. All right, thanks to Sean Murphy. That was good stuff. Hopefully we can have him on again soon. Hopefully there's more weeks here of Pistons coverage. We've got at least a couple here. But we're going to turn our attention to college basketball. As fans of the show may know, I'm an Indiana Hoosiers grad, and one of the premier teams of that day was the 2002 Hoosiers, and the engine of that team was A.J. Moye. He had an iconic March Madness moment, and so I want to talk to him about that and some of his career afterwards, because he's had a very interesting career here. So we'll bring AJ on the show after the break. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. As Rex knows, I'm really excited about this next guest. He makes me want to chant his name, because when I was going to Indiana, the chants of AJ Moye with the clap would ring through Assembly Hall. And now I get to talk to him on air. So welcome to the show, AJ.
What's up? How you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm glad to have you on the show here, because it was fun to see your career progress, because I often compare people to you and your skill set, because you had a unique skill set when you played, and you did whatever the team needed, and you filled in all the gaps, and I felt like you were an essential piece of that era, that key era of Hoosiers basketball.
Mm-hmm. Hey man, it was so much fun. Just a lot of fun. Just a lot of fun.
Well, what were some of your highlights of your career at Indiana?
The highlights of it. I mean, the highlight of my career at Indiana was just like getting to go in the Assembly Hall every day, man, and look up and you see championship banners on one side, and on the other side you got the Big Tens, you got Final Four appearances, right? So it's things like that pushed me and drove me to become, I guess, what I became at school, and to try to push my very best to just be able to leave some piece of legacy behind, something that will add to the great lore which is Indiana basketball.
Well, you ended up with a Sports Illustrated cover, so I say you've achieved that goal. Right, AJ?
Yeah, I mean, that was pretty awesome. I was actually on two of them, actually. There's another one. There was another one, like one of those March Madness ones, and I was in there somewhere. But no, it was all fun. I think ultimately, man, when you place the focus on work, and you place the focus on competing, and you place the focus on passion, and you place the focus on just being a good teammate and being someone who never say die, I think that naturally you'll move into some sort of lore, some sort of realm in that type of way.
Oh yeah, well, and you've continued your career here. It was interesting to research and see where you've been. I knew you had hooked up with Valparaiso, but I also want to talk to you about your time with the Mamba Academy, because that you have to have some great stories there.
Oh yeah, man, it was truly a treat and a blessing, man. Like anytime you get to work with anyone who's as talented as Kobe Bryant, anyone who's is painstakingly like just enthralled in the game of basketball as Kobe, it kind of just rubs off on you. I was like that anyway. Me and him, we had a great relationship, a great working relationship, a great relationship off the floor. And he was just so much fun to be around, man. We talk about things like John Battle's jump shot, or you know what I mean, how Dave Bean would handle the ball, you know, like, so just the most abstract type of things we would talk about for days. We both enjoyed having our daughters. We both loved and appreciated them so much. And yeah, man, I think with Kobe, man, it was just something that was it was refreshing for me to meet someone who loved the game of basketball as passionately and sincerely as I did.
Well, he was clearly a student of the game. I mean, everybody looks at his talent and how successful he was, especially at scoring the basketball. But then you look at some of his influences because of the international route that he took. You know, I know one of his big influences, I imagine maybe you guys talked about him, was a guy named Oskar Schmidt, who most people wouldn't have even heard of, but he has been inducted into the Hall of Fame. He never played in an NBA game, but I think that's what helped influence his game, was the fact that he had a lot of varied influences. Like you said, took pieces from different people and said, oh, I like the way this guy shot, or this guy handled, or this guy did that, and that's why he rose to the level that he did.
Yeah, and I think there's something like for example, I'll read you, like, so I'm almost nuts with how I go about it. I'm trying to find, like, so basically I have these sort of notes on your phone, right?
Right.
You write, and I have these notes for days, man. I just have notes of eons and eons of stuff. But I have, like, you know, I have Rajon Rondo, Kobe Bryant, you know, Zach LaVine. Like, I'll see a guy do a move, and I'll just write their name down. Then I'll write down what move they did, and then I'll write a counter to the move, and then I'll write a counter to the counter to the counter to the move, and then I'll write a counter to the counter to the counter to the counter. So that's just kind of like how my brain works, and his works the same way. And so sometimes we watch games, and we may meet the next day or a couple days after, and we'd be talking about a certain move, and then talking about the certain options that one could possibly do after that move. And so those are the type of conversations that I miss having with Kobe. I just love them.
Well, those are probably hard conversations to have with others, because you're talking so far down the line with the counter to the counter to the counter. How, I know you're from that area, but how did you initially get associated with Kobe?
Oh man, this is hilarious. So I first saw Kobe like that, like an AAU, ABCD camp. And then when I was 13, he was in California. Back then, remember the summer league, the NBA summer league used to be at Long Beach State. A lot of people don't know that, like Long Beach State University. And you could just walk in and you could just watch like NBA rookies and second, third year players compete, right? And I'm in there and Kobe Bryant is playing against, I want to say he was playing against the Clippers, like his first game, and he had maybe 35, 36 points. And after the game, they're talking to him. They said, Kobe, we hear your work ethic is legendary. We hear you're one of the greatest, hardest workers to ever play. And tell us about it. And he's like, yeah, it's true. I work hard. But he said, my thing is, I believe in myself. And he said, he said, you have to believe in yourself and nobody else will. And he said that, and I wrote it on a piece of paper. I said, you have to believe in yourself and nobody else will, right? And I showed him that piece of paper like later on in life, right? When I was fast forward that to when I'm 17, and Kobe signed with Adidas then, he has his own shoes. And then, so he was at ABCD camp, and he talked to like the top 10 of us in the room. And we talked to him, and he said, he got my number, and he's like, you're ever in LA, hit me. And so I hit him in LA probably like 3 weeks later. I mean, we're at the Palisades running at 5 in the morning. Man, 5:45 when the gym shooting shots. After we shoot shots, take a little break, then we work out, go get something to eat, come back to the gym, and then we play pickup. And after pickup, we're shooting again and working out. And then it's like 7, 8 at night before we're done. And the funny thing about it was, like, when we started the day, might have been 5 or 6 of us. At the end of the day, it was me and Kobe. So it's like it's those moments like that. And so when I was working at Mamba, at Sports Academy at first, I knew Kobe. You know, I just said to I know Kobe. Like, I can get him down here. And so, you know, powers that be, man, they all talk. You got Kobe down there. And next thing you know, you bought like 49% of the company and he became a partner with us. It was great.
Yeah, that had to be a great experience for you there, because I feel like a lot of these stories came out after his unfortunate passing. The fact that he did work with so many players like yourself, and he did try to impart that work ethic. He wasn't always looked at that, I think, looked at as that during his career, but then once the stories came out more, it was like, yeah, he was always doing this with kids in his neighborhood and in different spots. So it's fun to hear those stories of him impacting you as a young player in California.
Yeah, man. I was just grateful and still thankful to this day, and I love him to this day, and miss him to this day, and just try to impart and take with me everything that he showed me and taught me.
Yeah, he definitely can't spend too much time, or we can talk about him for the rest of the interview, really. But I want to talk a little bit more about what you're up to now, and I want to talk about some of your other influences too, because I'm curious who else influenced you growing up. But we got to take a quick break, and we'll come back with AJ. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with AJ Moye. I want to talk a little bit more about the influences, AJ, but I have to ask you, because we just finished with March Madness, and you had one of the iconic March Madness moments that was on one of your Sports Illustrated covers. I didn't realize you ended up on 2, but the iconic one that I think of is the block with Carlos Boozer. And I'm wondering what you remember from that game and from that sequence, because you always played all out, but clearly you're very cerebral, as we're hearing in this interview. So I'm wondering some of your memories from that game, because obviously you were playing on instinct, but I was actually in the arena for that game. One of the most electric environments I've been in, and it was incredibly fun to watch the comeback. What are some of your memories from that game in particular?
From that game in particular, man, my favorite memories are, it has to be with the comeback, right? It was great to see, and it was something that was something that was indicative of who we were. It's just a total eclectic team effort. Like, Jared Odom might have sparked the comeback, right? And Ice hit a three, Hornsby hit a three. I had my little 8-0 run, 6-7, 8-0 run. Jared Jeffries had his little 6-8-0 run. Jeff Newton had his putbacks here or there. You know what I mean? And we all came up with plays defensively to stop it all. But, of course, the play is the play. The block on Carlos Boozer was mighty doggone sweet. I'm not going to lie to you.
Oh, well, of course. You've got to take a victory lap about that. That's what sealed it there. That was an amazing comeback. I remember that because I remember when Jay Williams front-rimmed that layup, that was kind of when the comeback started, and then you guys got a lot of momentum and you got going. So it was amazing because that Duke team was really formidable, but you guys just got in a zone, and that second half run was unlike anything I had seen up until that point.
Yeah, I mean, it was great, man. It really was. It really was great. I mean, it's one of those few moments. I mean, we had a moment like that this year coaching at Valparaiso, and I think it might have been even crazier. We were down 22 on the road against Western Michigan this year with 6 minutes left, and we came back and won it in regulation, right? We had of course, 3 at the buzzer to win it, but of course it wasn't as big as the Sweet 16, and it wasn't playing the number 1 team in the country. So I think in that respect, ours took a little bit more of a precedence, but it was just super cool the fact that we could be down 18, 19 points and battle back and have the wherewithal and have the mind to keep competing. I loved how we competed. I remember one possession, it had to be towards, 2-3 minutes left in the game, and Duke was moving the ball on us pretty well, but we kept rotating. They got the offensive rebound, kicked it out, I sprint out, boom, swung the ball, someone else sprint out, they swung it again, I sprint out, and then Duhan drives and throws it out of bounds between the legs of Carlos Boozer. So it was like, we just kept having that one more effort. Nothing like having that one more effort. I think that was the biggest difference in our team that year, man. No matter what, we would always make that one more effort.
Oh yeah, that was a special team. Yeah, that was a joy to watch, especially that game. And I had season tickets that year and everything. It was a fun team. Still one of my favorite teams to watch. But I want to talk about your coaching career a little bit here, because you talked about Valparaiso. Clearly you have a passion for kind of doing what you were talking about with Kobe, what he was doing with you, mentoring young players. You've been doing that a lot. You coached in high school, now you're coaching in college. Tell me about what made you want to get into that and some of your favorite parts of the coaching part of your career here.
Oh, well, man, coaching was fun. So I had been coaching since almost I retired, because I became the head coach of Oaks Christian School. That's where my brothers went to school. So the cool thing was I got to coach my little brothers in high school, and that was just such a blast. We won an awful lot. Then I went to Oak Park. I was associate head coach there. We won an awful lot. But at the same time, I was running the Mamba Academy, so that was a lot of fun. And then I would do that. And then I got the itch to coach in college, but I'm a firm believer in God. I love God, so I just prayed, fasted, and I just really prayed that God would bless me with an opportunity. And man, lo and behold, like a couple months later, Roger Kyle called me and said he prayed for 5 days, and every time he'd wake up, he said, God put me on his heart. And so Roger called and he offered me an assistant coaching position with him at Valparaiso, and I'm currently doing that now, and I love it. It's a challenge, especially in this new NIL world. And so he had to build it from scratch. I mean, when he got the job, man, we had $7,500 in NIL, and he had to build it up. And we built it up to a pretty respectable level right now. I'm not gonna say, but at least we can offer our kids some compensation. But it's still a little strange to hear it, still a little strange to say, and it's the only thing that's not frustrating, but the bigger schools, what's happening now with the NIL is just, and it's turning it's going to be a have-not type of society, you know what I mean? So it's going to kind of eradicate and maybe cause that middle ground to erode a little bit, because you follow me, because
I do.
The Power Four, the money that they can money that they have, the money that they have in supply, the money that they have is fair. It makes it a little bit unfair when you're trying to get players, and now players, you know how many times I hear guys like, man, I love you guys, I love what you guys are about, I love this, but these guys are giving me X amount, so it's interesting. It really is. I hopped in the game at an interesting time, but at the end of the day, it's still basketball, and it's still a lot of stuff that I love, and the ones that we are blessed to have, man, we love on them, we get them better. I mean, we've helped a lot of kids come into some life-changing money. You know what I mean? We have 2 kids right now that are probably going to make $2 million next year. So it's interesting, but it's just a new type of dimension, and we got to learn how to navigate it, and what will be will be.
Well, too bad they didn't have NIL during the AJ Moye era, because I have a feeling there would have been some NIL money for you. But yeah, I hear what you're saying there, because I think we even saw it in the tournament a little bit this year with all of the chalk results in the NCAA tournament, and the 1 seeds not only prevailing, but then also recruiting at the same time. We talked about that in our first segment with the guy that is the host for Michigan State basketball, because it's interesting to watch. Like you said, it's kind of the haves and the have-nots, because the rich get richer, and you end up being kind of a feeder school to the bigger programs, because if you're just looking at it from an objective standpoint, I'm sure they obviously valued your coaching. Their career was enriched by the fact that they were coached by you. But then if they're offered a bunch of money, especially not knowing that they're going to make it to the NBA, that part not being guaranteed, it's also kind of hard to fault the kids too when you say, well, wait a minute, they're going to make a significant amount of money.
No, you can't fault the kids, and ultimately you can't fault the big fish either. You know what I mean? It's the nature of the ocean, man. You're in the sea, man. If there's a tiger shark and you're a crustacean, then you probably get eaten. But say there's a big time great white shark, well, he probably eat the tiger shark. You know what I mean? So it is what it is, man. But you just have to, the cool thing about us, and the great thing about us, and the thing that, to me, that touches my soul and touches my heart, the reason why I went to Valpo, Roger Powell is a minister. Roger Powell believes in God. Roger Powell loves God. Roger Powell, his heart is about as open, and it's about as loving, and it's about as kind, and it's about as gentle as it can be. You know what I mean? And he's one of those guys that you just root for, and I love him. So when he offered me the job, I didn't ask him where the job was. I didn't ask him how much I'm going to make. I just told him I'll work for him. You understand? And so that's the cool thing about it. That's the type of individual I've always been. I've always been an individual who was kind of powered by his heart, right? And, I'll always do the things that I love with the people that I love, and I love Roger Powell. So working here, working with him is great and awesome. But, just working in the reality of the modern world, and it's cool. It's fine. I understand it. You know what I mean? It's not like I'm gonna say like no. Like I probably would have made $5 to $6 million if I was playing. So, by all means, I understand it. It does make it. It makes it different. Like it's not not the same. It's not the same as when I played or Roger played or Coach Pat Baldwin played. You know what I mean? It's a different ballgame. But still basketball at the end of the day, though. You know, but it's just getting your team right, recruiting your team, getting your players. It's slightly different in a way.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it has changed a lot, and there's going to be more changes that'll happen too, because there will be kickback effects to some of these rules that you're talking about. But you guys are doing a great job navigating it, and it's fun to watch what you're doing with the program down there. But I really appreciate you joining the show. This was fun to talk to you about all your experiences, talk to you about your college career, your stuff with Kobe, and now your coaching career. So I'll look forward to following you here in the future, and tell people where they can follow you. I know you're not super active on X. Is there anywhere to direct them here?
Well, I'm on X. I just don't know where I am. Hold on, let me see it. So my X is ran by my wife. Believe it or not, like I don't do it, but on X I'm AJ_Moye2. So that's me on X. And on Instagram, I am. Let me get this for you. On Instagram, I am. Man, and you know this time of year is crazy because everyone in their mother's calling me because you know it's just that time of year. I'm AJAY_MOYAY, and that's at Instagram.
Perfect.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. Well, yeah, make sure to check them out, follow them. A lot of great knowledge there. And, we'll look forward to seeing what you do next. But really appreciate you joining the show, AJ.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Happy to come back here with Zach Linfield. He's the Tigers PA announcer. We've had a few of the play-by-play announcers in the Tigers system, but this is our first public address announcer, so I'm excited to talk with him. How you doing, Zach?
Hey, man, I'm good. I appreciate the opportunity with you having me on.
Definitely, yeah. Excited to talk with you here. We talked with another Zach in the Tigers system here at the beginning of the show, and he's a state grad. You're a Michigan grad, so we're kind of bookending with the Tigers Michigan school folks here. So if you want to get your takes on Michigan in the tournament, we can do that too as part of the interview. He covered some of the Michigan State stuff for us.
Hey, listen, Zach Surdenik, he's incredible. I think he's got a really bright future in broadcasting. Him and I have grown kind of tight through the last year or so, just talking Tigers baseball because he was an intern with the Tigers last year and Dan Dickerson. So him and I have had some pretty good conversations, and we're always rooting for each other.
Oh, definitely. Well, we were talking with him about the fact, because we talked to both of you this episode of the show, but we've talked to Dan Hasty previously, Greg Gagne, and I watch a lot of the Tigers broadcasts, and obviously Benetti and Dickerson are very strong. They've done a great job with the talent on the field, but clearly whoever's doing the hiring on the broadcasting side knows what they're doing, because that talent pool on your guys' side of things is very high end there.
Well, listen, I appreciate it. I think the people at the Tigers and in the entire Detroit Tigers organization really they love being creative, and I think the youthful impact that we've had with the Tigers this past year or so, and really just in the state of Michigan, has been a lot of fun. So it's a renaissance of sorts, but we're all in it for the right reasons. We all love the team, and we love Michigan. So it's been a fun time for sure just to get started.
Oh yeah, well, yeah. How does that work with the public address side? Because obviously that's a different role, but it's still broadcasting. What drew you more to that rather than more the play-by-play route, or is that something that you'd maybe be open to in the future?
Yeah, it's funny. I always kind of had a knack for doing PA, but I knew it was always going to be play-by-play in the end that I wanted to do. But when this opportunity comes to be the public address announcer for the Tigers, when Jason Benetti's in the seat to do TV and the legendary Dan Dickerson's in the seat to do radio, it's kind of hard to move up quickly when those two legends are in the seats that they have. But this opportunity with the Tigers just kind of came around from my opportunities at the University of Michigan. I was referenced there. They gave me a couple of showcases, high school games, college games, and eventually it turned into one call on a May afternoon last year. They said, "Can you come fill in for our current PA announcer?" It was Tigers Rangers, and I got one game, and then they parted ways, or the previous public address announcer left Detroit, and they had an opening in the off season. I auditioned, got the job, but it's always going to be play-by-play at heart, and that's still the end goal for me. Is if I can parlay being the PA announcer for the Tigers and do play-by-play for example, the Lions or Michigan football, I think that's a dream life come true for me.
Oh, okay. So you're looking more on the football side for the play-by-play piece.
Yeah, football and basketball. That's kind of what I indulged myself into early, and it's still what I train pretty much every darn day when I'm not at the ballpark.
Well, and that's interesting. So maybe more on the radio side of things, because obviously those, especially the football piece, that's tougher because the contracts come from the league piece and they don't have dedicated announcers. That part always I lament at a little bit, because I do pay a lot of attention to the broadcast team, and it would be nice to have a regular, I know they do on the radio, but a regular Lions broadcast team. It takes me a little bit to adjust to each team that does it. So maybe on the radio side of things there?
Yeah, like Dan Miller, the radio guy with the Lions, I mean, he's a legend in his own part. He does such a good job bringing the broadcast to life, as do really a plethora of announcers in Detroit. I think every single Detroit broadcaster has set up young people like myself and Zach Surdenik for so much success, just because the role models that we have are so darn talented. But yeah, no, I agree. It'd be funny and interesting to see like an NFL team with a home broadcast, like how the Pistons, the Tigers, and the Red Wings all have. But since it's such a national thing with the NFL, it's obviously so different. But Dan Miller does such a good job bringing those broadcasts to life for Lions fans, whether good or bad. And I'm very happy for him that the last few years have been so successful with the Lions.
Zach, you mentioned earlier about training to be a play-by-play broadcaster. What goes into training? Do you have like some type of repetitions you do, or some type of program?
Yeah, so I try to make 1 to 2 tapes a week, and that's honestly, man, it's just sitting here in front of my TV, opening up YouTube TV and calling an old game and trying to put a drive or two together and listen to them back to back. And then a few days later, I'll do the same exact drives and try to improve on the first tape that I made, if that kind of makes sense. So it's expanding the vocabulary, opening up Wikipedia to find a couple of like pop culture references or different references that I can try to insert into a game. I'm very lucky. My roommate here in Ann Arbor, we've been roommates now for 3 years. He's my color guy with the Michigan Panthers, and we do games just as a mock broadcast for practice, and he joins me just so I can go and get the reps. So I've got a really supportive group around me that are willing to do some things that are kind of stepping outside of their comfort zone, and they're having fun doing it, and so am I.
So you record these rehearsal play-by-play broadcasts, and then you go back and critique them and find ways of improving your skill?
Absolutely.
Oh, that's interesting. And is that something that you can also apply to your public address announcing?
You know, I always try to mix it up a little bit, but honestly, man, the PA stuff for me is really easy. I love the job. I adore it, but I get a script, and all I have to do is try to sound good and not, twist my tongue too many times.
I understand.
So, yeah, the play-by-play stuff, you're allowed to have much more creativity, and I can't say that I don't at the Tigers, because when they brought me in, they were like, "You're young, our director's young, our DJ's young, like, do whatever you want, man, to try and switch this thing up and to make it more youthful, even though there's an older audience in baseball, but it's still growing and expanding every day." So they gave me a ton of creative liberty. I'm just trying to still find my footing in doing so, just because I'm so new.
Yeah, and it sounds like even though you kind of described the public addressing as kind of like a stock type of gig, but it sounds like, and Ryan, it sounds like that the Tigers are allowing him to kind of add his own personality into it.
Yeah, it seems like it. I mean, I feel like because we were talking about this with the other Zach, that there's just a lot of jobs, a lot of hats that you guys wear, so the skills are transferable. So that's I'm sure as you're honing your craft, this will help with a piece, and then you got the play-by-play piece, and that'll make you a more complete broadcaster as you kind of move along with your career here.
Yeah, and it's never a negative thing to just get better at each facet of sports broadcasting, whether that's public address announcing, play-by-play on radio, or play-by-play on TV, or sideline reporting, or studio hosting. There's so many things that you can do to stay involved and to fill up your schedule and to improve at. And I mean, if someone wants to make a career out of it, why not go 10 toes in and put the 10 fingers in as well? Just give it your best effort, and that's honestly what I've tried to do at a young age. And thankfully, so far for me, it's paying off. But the Tigers thing certainly isn't the last step. Like I said, I created some pretty lofty goals for myself years ago while I was a student here at Michigan, and I still intend to try and follow through with those.
And it's nice that there's so many opportunities out there now, because we talked with James Larson about some of the UFL stuff going on, and even watching that and the amount of resources that they're putting to that. You talked about the Panthers, but yeah, there's more and more opportunities. So you're living in a good era to achieve some of those goals that you set out.
Yeah, 100%. I'm super thankful for anyone that gives me the opportunity, even just to go and get reps. And that's exactly what the UFL thing is for me. And it's funny because James is just one city over from me here in Ann Arbor. He lives over by Eastern Michigan. And we do an interview once every few weeks before home Panthers games just to get the lowdown on what's going on outside of Detroit and the Michigan Panthers, like who's talented, who's a name to look for this week, what's the scouting report on the team we're playing. For example, this past week we played San Antonio yesterday afternoon, actually, at Ford Field. So, yeah, there are so many opportunities just for young broadcasters and to expand our brains on all things broadcasting.
Well, I want to come back with that here, Zach, because we're talking about the UFL and the Tigers and how baseball is trying to get some of the youth into the game here with having on average an older fan base. That was interesting to watch that with UFL. So I want to get your take on some of the changes here to some of these games. But stick with us. We're going to come back with Zach here. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Back here with Zach Linfield, the Tigers public address announcer. Yeah, Zach, you mentioned trying to get more of the youth into the game, and I've always been interested in that because they're clearly trying in baseball. They're trying to speed up the game a little bit. I thought they did some interesting things in spring training with in-game interviews and the whole pitch challenge system. I think some of those things are to get the young people, just like the UFL. That was what was interesting to me about that piece. That's what made me think of it. They are doing that game completely differently. And Joe Tessitore, who's one of the broadcasters that I really like, I watched him do one of the early Panthers games, and they're clearly putting a lot into that game. So I'm curious what you think of some of the ideas to try to get the youth, especially into the baseball side of things here.
Yeah, I think it's worth trying to be adaptable to new things and to be flexible. And the UFL is a perfect example of that, because there are so many quirky rules and fun things that they try to implement into it. And, I mean, even from the broadcast side, you kind of have to be flexible, and you have to understand all the rules so that you can be the first one to give people the lowdown on exactly what those new rules are. Like the kickoff rules. If you kick a punt and it lands out of bounds in the air inside the 20, another team automatically gets the football up at the 25. And then if you turn your head to baseball, I think the new rule for replays and reviews on the Tigers are, by the way, are just mauling the Brewers right now. They're now up 9-0 in the fifth, and my eye keeps catching the TV screen. But yeah, even with baseball, I think that rule will be pretty solid. I would believe starting in 2026. It makes sense. Umpires aren't perfect, and I believe hitters, pitchers, catchers challenging different calls isn't to be disrespectful towards umpires and officials. It's just to clean the game up a little bit. There should be user error in baseball, and I don't foresee baseball changing too much. People aren't complaining much anymore about the pitch clock because it makes games more efficient. You can get in, you can get out. For people like me who have to sit in the booth for 2 to 4 hours, if that clock wasn't a thing, I'd probably have to go to the bathroom quite a few times and need more snacks. So I certainly don't mind the rule.
Well, yeah, and I mean it's tough because you want to keep the older guard and what they're used to, but yeah, you want to still make new fans and give memorable moments to those young fans and reasons to come back to the game and become a lifetime fan. And I think that the pitch thing is interesting because there's always a difference when you watch things on TV because we get all the different angles and the umpires, referees, what have you, don't have access to those things. So like you said, there's going to be human error. I'm usually in defense of that sort of thing, but it did seem to go pretty smooth in spring training, so it'll be interesting to see how that develops. But I do want to, I know you're watching the game right now a little bit in the background. I do want to get your take on this team because you watch them day in and day out, and they seem to be ahead of schedule. And even though they started with some injuries at the beginning of the year, they're off to a good start, and it's been fun to watch them carry the momentum from the surprise playoff run last season here.
Yeah, I don't think it was ever going to be a surprise that the pitching was going to be solid. There's not much turnover in the bullpen, and the two guys that they did go and grab that have made an early impact, Tommy Kahnle and John Brevia, have been solid so far for the team, and you need a bullpen, especially in the AL Central where bullpens tend to be pretty darn good. I mean, look at Cleveland and how far it got them throughout all of last year, even when they had some issues with their starting pitching. But starting pitching for the Tigers, when you've got 5 or 6 guys, eventually when Alex Cobb comes back, how exactly do you decide which one to kick out? It will likely be, at least in my opinion, unless there's an injury, you've got to put Cobb in the rotation. Jackson Joe probably leaves the rotation but stays on the Major League roster. I don't think you can take him down after how well he started it. But even the offense today, after scoring 1 run in what kind of seemed like an abysmal performance yesterday against the Twins, they scored 9 runs in 4 innings so far. So it's good to see the effort that the Tigers have put in, especially with how scary the team should be come June. And I'm pointing 2 fingers to the sky to say hopefully Parker Meadows comes back and is healthy. Matt Vierling will be back at some point. Wenzel Perez will be back at some point. Rogers will be back at some point. So listen, man, it's as exciting as you could possibly get to be a Tiger fan right now. And even though they're down in terms of how many guys they have on the injured list, it's an exciting time to be a Tiger.
Yeah, they're holding serve pretty well with all those injuries because, like you said, I think that was one of the big differences. I know they made a lot of the whole pitching chaos thing last season, but part of that was because it was kind of hard to cobble together a rotation by the end of the year. Now they have a reverse problem because that bullpen got so strong, and then they had some of the young arms come up, solidified that rotation with getting Flaherty back. And now, I mean, some of those names that they had to send down with the roster cuts at the beginning of the season, it was a good example of the depth here of the pitching staff, and hopefully they can match it on the bats, but they've still been usually doing pretty well with the situational hitting and all the things that Hinch emphasizes. So yeah, if that can come together at the right time, that the pitching shouldn't waver much because they've got a ton of depth there.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, man, the pitching should be so good, and they came into a tough situation last year at the trade deadline. You trade Flaherty, you get a shortstop back. You signed Flaherty back in the offseason, but right after you traded Flaherty at the All-Star break last year, you get another guy injured, and it just all kind of goes downhill. But yet, they still did literally the improbable from 0.02% to the playoffs. And you look at what they did, and they won a series, the wild card, and they go to the ALDS. They had a home game in Game 4. They had Skubal on the mound in Game 5. So, yeah, it's fun and so much to look forward to. They're only 2 or 3 weeks into the season, and you just look at them, and all you can really do is smile.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be fun to watch this team. It's fun to watch the exuberance now in the fan base because that has returned, and they've been wanting a good team, and now the team's kind of ahead of schedule, and it's fun to watch all the games and all the broadcasters do the games. So I'm excited to see what ends up happening with you and your career, but we appreciate you coming on the show. Tell people where they can follow you here in the meantime.
Yeah, man, social medias are all the same. It's just Zach Linfield, ZachLinfield. So Instagram, Twitter are really the only two that I'm active on, but that's pretty much it for me, man. I just try to go unnoticed for the most part.
Well, yeah, you're the voice in the background, but which is good. But you do a great job with that. So we appreciate you coming on, and hopefully we'll have you on later in the season here.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I would love to. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Zach. All right, thanks to Zach Linfield and the rest of our guests, AJ Moye, Sean Murphy, and Zach Surdenik. We doubled up with the play-by-play Zachs here. I want to thank our sponsors as well: Mary Freebed, Collectible Insurance Services, West Michigan Eye Care Associates, Aircall Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Calder Financial, Encore Business Group, and Ryan Investments. We